She moved into the little house everyone cursed and found, in an old mirror, the truth that got her husband killed. Would you dare to look into a mirror said to show things that ought not to be seen, knowing the last person who did went mad? But this story really happened in April of 1889 in the town of Blackwood Creek, deep in the hills of West Virginia. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button below, because what Clara discovered in that mirror didn't just change her fate. It uncovered secrets powerful men had tried to bury for decades. The end of this story will leave you speechless. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I love to see how far these stories travel. It was April 14th, 1889, late afternoon, and a fine drizzle was beginning to fall on the red clay road that cut through the village of Blackwood Creek. Clara May Thompson walked slowly, her bare feet sinking into the warm mud as she held tight to the hand of her eldest daughter, Laura, aged 11. Little Beatrice, only 7, clung to her mother's skirt, the 2 bundles they carried on their backs representing all that was left of their lives. The sky was heavy, grey as molten lead, and a mist began to rise from the dense pine forest that surrounded the town. The smell of damp earth mingled with the acrid scent of wood smoke from the cottage chimneys, and a chill began to seep into their bones through their thin, patched dresses. Clara was 34, but she looked 50. Her brown hair, always so neatly combed when she was married, was now tied in a messy bun, with rebellious strands escaping to stick to her face, wet with rain and tears. Her hands, once skilled with a needle and thread when she sewed for the well-to-do ladies of the town, were calloused and rough, her nails broken from heavy labor. The faded calico dress had patches upon patches, and her slumped shoulders spoke of the invisible weight she carried. But it was her eyes that told the deepest story. Brown eyes that had once been lively and bright now seemed too deep-set, holding a permanent shadow of exhaustion and pain that no amount of sleep could erase. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She only knew she couldn't go back, not ever again. 2 months earlier, Clara had a life. Not a life of riches, far from it, but a decent life, with a roof over her head and food on the table. She was married to Vincent Thompson, the blacksmith on the Farris estate, a good man who worked from sunup to sundown at the forge, shaping horseshoes, mending tools, crafting gates and fences. Vincent was respected in the region. When he struck his hammer against the anvil, the metallic sound echoed through the estate like a beating heart, steady and strong. He had strong, calloused hands, but they held Clara with tenderness at night and lifted his daughters into the air, making them laugh. They lived in a small but comfortable house on the estate's property, a 2-room cabin of daub and timber with plank flooring, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove that warmed the place on cold days, and a yard where Clara grew collard greens, squash and okra. The girls went to the town school twice a week, on the days the landowner let them use the wagon to take the workers' children. On Sundays, the family went to the service at the main church, Clara in her good Sunday dress, Vincent in a dark coat that had been his father's, and the girls with ribbons in their hair. After the service, they would stop on the town green to chat with acquaintances, sometimes having coffee and a piece of cornbread at Miller's Mercantile. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, until the night of February 12th, 1889. Clara remembered every detail of that night as if it was seared into her memory with a branding iron. Vincent had gone into town that afternoon to buy coal for the forge. He came back at the end of the day, but he was different, pale, sweating, with a strange look in his eyes, as if he'd seen something terrible. When Clara asked what had happened, he just shook his head and said his stomach was bothering him, that he must have eaten something bad. He went to bed early, which he never did, and during the night he began to groan in pain. In the early morning, the pain worsened. Vincent writhed on the bed, his body drenched in sweat, vomiting dark green bile. Clara ran to get help, But by the time the company doctor arrived, Vincent was already delirious. He shouted things that made no sense, or at least that's what Clara thought at the time. He yelled that they knew, that they were going to kill him, that he had seen too much. The doctor said it was brain fever, that it happened like that, suddenly, without warning. He gave him laudanum for the pain and told Clara to apply cold compresses. For 3 days, Vincent agonized. Clara never left his side, not even to eat. She held his burning hand, placed wet cloths on his forehead, and prayed every prayer she knew. Laura and Beatrice cried, hidden in a corner of the room, terrified by their father's moans. On the 3rd day, the afternoon of February 15th, Vincent opened his eyes one last time. He looked at Clara with a sudden, frightening clarity, squeezed her hand with a strength she hadn't imagined he still possessed, and whispered something she couldn't quite understand. But it sounded like careful, or maybe take care. Then his hand went limp, his eyes went vacant, and he was gone. The burial was the next day, in a simple wooden coffin that Vincent's own co-workers had made. Few people came. The landowner sent flowers and his regrets, saying he was busy with urgent business. Reverend Anselm performed the ceremony quickly, almost mechanically, as if he were in a hurry to be done. Clara noticed, but she was too numb with grief to care. They threw dirt on the coffin, and Clara felt as if they were burying her heart along with him. A week later, while she was still trying to figure out how to go on living, the estate's foreman showed up at her door. He was a large, coarse man named Olin, who had always looked at Clara in a way that made her feel unclean. He didn't waste time with condolences. He said that Vincent owed the estate $300, money borrowed for tools and materials. He said the debt was now Clara's. Clara was stunned. Vincent had never mentioned any debt. They had always lived within their means, without extravagances, without luxuries, but also without debts. She told the foreman this. Olin gave a cruel smile and showed her a piece of paper. It was written there with a signature that looked like Vincent's, though the hand was shakier than usual, dated 6 months prior. Clara looked at the paper, uncomprehending. How could they owe so much money? What would Vincent have borrowed it for? The foreman offered no explanations. He just said she had 1 week to pay or to leave the house. Since he knew she had no way to pay, the week was just a cruel formality. Clara tried everything. She went to see the landowner, but he wouldn't receive her. She went to the house of the lady she used to sew for, Mrs. Felicia, the wife of the local justice. The door was shut in her face by the housemaid, who said her mistress wasn't receiving visitors. She sought out Vincent's family, his brothers who lived on another farm miles away. She sent a message. The reply came back, cold and short. They couldn't help. They had their own troubles. She sought out Reverend Anselm, begging for guidance. He listened with a distant, almost bored expression, and said she should have faith that God would provide, but he offered no concrete help. The week ended. Olin returned with 2 men. They gave Clara half an hour to gather what she could carry. She grabbed the girl's clothes, a blanket, her iron skillet, the porcelain icon of the Virgin Mary that had belonged to her mother, dead for years. Olin rummaged through her things, took the skillet back, saying it belonged to the estate. He took the blanket too. He left only the clothes and the icon. As Clara walked out for the last time from the house where she had been happy, where she had been a wife and a mother, Olin locked the door behind her with a new padlock. He didn't look back as she began to cry. Clara spent the first night with her daughters under the large oak tree on the church green. It was cold, and they huddled together under their bundles to try and stay warm. Laura didn't cry, but Beatrice sobbed quietly until she fell asleep from exhaustion. Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the stars through the branches, trying to understand how her life had crumbled so completely, so quickly. 2 months ago she had a husband, a home, a future. Now she had nothing. Less than nothing. The next morning, Reverend Anselm shooed her away from the churchyard. He said it wasn't proper, that it set a bad example, that there were rules. Clara almost laughed at the hypocrisy. Where was the Christian charity he preached about every Sunday? But she had no strength to argue. She was gathering her bundles when the Reverend, looking uncomfortable, pointed vaguely toward the edge of town. "There's a house down there," he said in a low voice. "It's empty. You could try there." And he hurried away, his black cassock fluttering, before Clara could ask anything more. That's how Clara met Miss Hattie. The old woman was sitting on the porch of her small daub and timber cottage, peeling potatoes into a wooden bowl. She must have been in her 70s, her face wrinkled like a dried apple, her white hair in a loose bun, but her eyes were still sharp and alert. When she saw Clara with the girls, she stopped what she was doing. "Where are you headed, child?" she asked, her voice raspy from what sounded like a lifetime of strong tobacco. Clara didn't know what to say. Miss Hattie looked at the thin, frightened girls, at the miserable bundles, and nodded. "You're hungry," she stated, not asked. Before Clara's pride could refuse, Hattie was already on her feet, heading inside. She returned with cornbread and a chunk of hard cheese. She gave it to the girls, who ate with the ravenous hunger of those who hadn't had a proper meal in days. While the girls chewed, Clara told her story. Not every detail, she didn't trust anyone yet, but enough. A widow, homeless, penniless, no family. Miss Hattie listened in silence, nodding her head from time to time. When Clara finished, the old woman was quiet for a while, looking down the dirt road that wound between the sparse houses of the town. Finally she spoke. "There's a house down yonder," she said, pointing toward the end of the street, where the pine forest began. "It's been empty a long time. You can go on in. Nobody will complain." Clara felt a flicker of hope, the first in days. A house, a roof, walls, but something in Miss Hattie's expression made her hesitate. "Why is it empty?" She asked. "If it's empty and so many people need a home, why does no one live there?" Miss Hattie averted her gaze, fiddled with her potatoes, buying time. "Folks round here are superstitious, child," she said at last, her tone that of someone choosing words carefully. "They say the place has a heavy air about it, that there are things there." Clara narrowed her eyes. "What kind of things?" The old woman sighed, seeming to weigh whether she should tell, and then decided Clara deserved to know what she was getting into. "The house belonged to a woman named Genevieve Estes," Hattie began in a low voice, as if sharing a secret. "She came here about 10 years ago, from who knows where. A strange woman, a solitary one, didn't mix with the other women, didn't go to church, didn't take part in the socials. Spent her time locked up in that little house, doing strange experiments with glass and chemicals. Folks said she was a witch, that she'd made a pact. I never believed that foolishness, but she was different, that's for sure. Educated, knew how to read and write, owned books. For a woman back then, that was already strange enough." Miss Hattie paused, drank some water from a clay cup, and continued. "For years, Genevieve lived there without bothering a soul. Sometimes I'd bring her some eggs, some greens, and she'd pay well, always polite, always distant. But about 7 years ago she changed, got nervous, frightened, would stand at the window looking out at the street like she was expecting someone. Started locking everything up, doors, windows, boarding up the cracks, and then the screaming started." "What kind of screaming?" Clara wanted to know, feeling a chill run up her spine. Hattie grimaced. "Screams of pure terror, child. In the middle of the night, Genevieve would scream that she was seeing things, that the mirror showed what it shouldn't, that she knew the truth, that they were going to kill her. The town was terrified. The Reverend went over there, wanted to perform an exorcism, but she threw him out, shouting that the church was part of the problem. That's when folks were sure she was possessed. One night," Hattie continued, looking at the floor as if replaying the scene, "the screams got worse. Terrible, like an animal being skinned alive, woke the whole town. Men grabbed lanterns and torches and went over. They broke down the door. The house was empty. Genevieve was gone. They searched everywhere, the yard, the woods, the river. Nothing. She was never seen again. "And what did the sheriff say?" Clara asked. Miss Hattie gave a bitter laugh. "The sheriff? That man said Genevieve must have run off or thrown herself in the river and been carried away by the current." "Case closed, but I know what I know, child. Genevieve didn't run away. Something happened to her, and since then nobody wants to go near that house." "Why?" Clara insisted. Hattie leaned closer, her voice even lower. "Because they say the place is cursed. That at night you can hear groans, that shadows move in the windows. 2 families tried to live there. The first ran out on the first night saying they saw spectres. The second lasted 3 days, but the wife started having terrible nightmares, and the husband swore something invisible pushed him in the middle of the night. Since then the house has been abandoned. And there's something else." Hattie hesitated. "There's a mirror in there. They say you shouldn't look in it, that it was in that mirror that Genevieve saw the things that drove her mad." Clara was silent, processing it all. A haunted house, a woman who went mad, a cursed mirror. It sounded like an old wives' tale, the kind you tell to scare children, but the fear on Miss Hattie's face was real. Laura tugged on her mother's sleeve, frightened. "Mama, we're not going to live there, are we?" Clara looked at her daughter, then at Beatrice, whose eyes were wide with terror. Then she looked out at the street, at the town that had turned its back on her, at the sky that was beginning to darken again with heavy rain clouds. "I have no choice," she said finally, her voice tired. "It's either that house or the street. I'd rather face ghosts than watch my daughters die of cold and hunger." Miss Hattie shook her head, a mix of pity and admiration in her eyes. "You're either brave or desperate, child. Maybe both. I'll pray for you. And look, now and then I'll leave some provisions on the fence post. You take them if you need them. But be careful in there. If you hear things, if you see things, you run. It's not worth the risk." And so, with the sun already setting, Clara and her daughters headed for the house at the end of the town. The building stood isolated, separated from the others by an overgrown lot full of high weeds. It was small. Its daub and timber walls had crumbling plaster. The shake roof had several holes. 2 windows were glassless and just boarded up from the outside, and the warped wooden door sagged to one side. The yard, if you could call it that, was overrun with weeds. The rail fence was down in several places, and a well in the corner was covered by a rotten wooden lid. Behind the house, the pine forest began abruptly, towering trees groaning in the wind, creating a dark, threatening green wall. Clara took a deep breath, made the sign of the cross, and pushed the door. The wood moaned on its rusty hinges, resisted for a moment, then gave way, opening with a sharp screech that made the girls flinch. The smell that wafted out was of mold, dampness, and abandonment. Clara entered, holding her daughter's hands tightly. The weak twilight filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, creating stripes of light in the dim interior. There were 2 rooms. The first, larger one, had a clay oven in the corner, a rough table turned on its side, 2 broken benches, and empty shelves on the wall. The floor was packed earth, with dark stains that could have been dampness or something else. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like macabre curtains, and there were rat droppings on the floor. The second room was smaller, likely the bedroom. It held a wooden bed frame without a mattress, an old chest with its lid ajar showing mouldy clothes, and on the wall a hook with a dress still hanging, tattered and dusty. In the corner was a small, broken mirror reflecting Clara's distorted image. She looked away quickly. The girls were terrified. Beatrice was crying softly, clinging to her mother's skirt. Laura, though older, was pale and trembling. Clara knew she had to be strong for them. "It's all right," she said, her voice trying to sound confident. We'll clean it up a bit and it'll be better. Tomorrow, in the daylight, it'll be easier. Tonight we just need to sleep." She righted the table, placed the bundles on it to create a sort of wall, and improvised a corner for the girls to sleep together. She lay down with them, holding them both, feeling their small, trembling bodies. She quietly sang the lullaby she always sang, about a little bird that flew far away but always came back to its nest. Gradually, exhausted, the girls fell asleep. But Clara couldn't. She lay with her eyes open in the near-total darkness, listening to the sounds of the old house, creaking wood, wind whistling through the cracks, the rustle of leaves outside, and other sounds that might have just been her imagination. Light footsteps, whispers, a long, low moan that could have been the wind, or not. She thought of Vincent, of the way he had died so suddenly, so strangely, of his delirious shouts about them knowing, about them coming to kill him. At the time she had thought it was just the fever talking. But what if it wasn't? What if Vincent had seen something, discovered something that cost him his life? The idea was too terrifying to contemplate. She preferred to believe it was a coincidence, that it really was a fever, that the debt was real, and she just hadn't known about it. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was going to grow. The following days were filled with hard work. Clara cleaned the house from top to bottom, swept the dirt floor, cleared away the cobwebs, and scrubbed the walls with water she drew from the well. She found some old rags and plugged the biggest holes in the roof. She repaired the benches as best she could. The clay oven still worked, and she managed to light a fire with dry twigs the girls gathered in the yard. She cooked a thin cornmeal porridge with a piece of rancid bacon Miss Hattie had left on the fence. It wasn't much, but it was food. Laura and Beatrice slowly got used to the house, though they still got nervous when night fell. During the day, with the sun streaming through the cracks, the place seemed less frightening. Just old and abandoned, the girls played in the yard, inventing games, making dolls from sticks and leaves. Clara tried to plant some collard seeds she found in the chest, hoping they would take. But the isolation was harsh. The townspeople made a detour to avoid passing near the house. When Clara went to fetch water from the fountain in the town square, the women would move away, make the sign of the cross, and whisper. She heard the comments. "The crazy widow who went to live in the cursed house. Poor girls. She won't last a month in there. She'll end up like the other one, mad or dead." Clara kept her head high, pretending not to hear, but each word was like a knife wound. Only Miss Hattie continued to help discreetly. Every 2 or 3 days, things would appear on the fence. Never much. The old woman was poor too, but always something. A potato, a handful of beans, an ear of corn, sometimes an egg. Clara thanked God and the old woman for the kindness that was keeping them alive. In their 3rd week there, something changed. It was an autumn afternoon. The sun was strong, but the air already had that crispness that heralded cold nights. Clara was in the bedroom trying to fix the loose wooden bed frame. The girls were in the yard. She stepped on a floorboard that gave way under her weight with a dry crack. The wood was rotten. It had held until now, but couldn't take any more. The board broke in half, and Clara nearly fell into the hole that opened up. She grabbed the wall, regained her balance, and looked down. There was a hollow space beneath the floor. It wasn't common in houses with dirt floors, but this room had floorboards, probably to protect from the damp. Clara grabbed her lamp and shone it into the hole. She saw dirt, old bricks, and something else, something covered by a black cloth. Her heart pounded. She remembered Miss Hattie's words. "They say there's a mirror in there. They say you shouldn't look in it. It was in that mirror that Genevieve saw the things." Clara froze, the lamp trembling in her hand. She should leave whatever it was down there. She should cover the hole and forget about it. But curiosity, or perhaps fate, was stronger. She knelt, reached her arm into the hole, and touched the object. It was heavy, cold. She pulled it out with an effort. It was large, oval-shaped, wrapped in a black cloth tied with thick twine. She placed it on the floor, hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she undid the knot. The cloth fell away. It was a mirror. Oval, about 2 feet high, with an ornate wrought silver frame decorated with intricate designs of leaves and flowers. The silver was tarnished, blackened by time, but the quality of the workmanship was still visible. The glass was cloudy, covered with a layer of dust and something else, a strange film that looked like trapped fog. Clara used the sleeve of her dress to carefully wipe the glass. The film came away partially, revealing the mirrored surface beneath. She lifted the mirror, held it at face level, and illuminated it with the lamp. She expected to see her reflection. She did for a second. Her thin face, her deep-set eyes, her disheveled hair. But then something shifted. The image rippled like water disturbed by a stone. It became murky, confused. Clara blinked, thinking it was just her tired eyes. But when she opened them again, the image had changed completely. It wasn't her face. It was a place, a dark interior. It looked like a warehouse or storeroom. There were shelves with sacks and barrels. And there was a man with his back to her. The man turned slowly, as if he knew he was being watched. Clara let out a cry that tore through the quiet afternoon. The man in the mirror was Vincent, her husband, her dead husband. The mirror fell from her hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud, but not breaking. Clara staggered backward, her back hitting the wall, and slid down to the floor, breathing in ragged gasps, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She was seeing things. She was going mad like Genevieve. The house truly was cursed. But when the initial panic subsided, replaced by a nauseating dizziness, the curiosity returned. Or maybe it wasn't curiosity. Maybe it was a need to see Vincent one more time, even if it was an illusion, a hallucination, a madness. She picked up the mirror again with trembling hands, shone the light on it, looked. The image was still there. Vincent in what she now recognized as the storeroom of Balthazar Giddens, the town merchant. Vincent was talking to someone. Clara couldn't see who, but then the person moved, stepping into the light. It was Balthazar, a stout man in his 50s with a thick mustache, always in a stained dark vest. Balthazar was smiling, an oily, unpleasant smile. He offered something to Vincent. A cup. Vincent hesitated, then accepted it and drank. Clara watched her husband drink, watched him hand the cup back. She saw Balthazar's smile widen. And then she saw Vincent clutch his throat, his expression one of surprise, then pain. She saw him stagger, fall to his knees. She saw Balthazar simply watching, arms crossed, a malicious grin on his face. She saw Vincent writhing on the floor. The image vanished. The mirror once again showed only her reflection, her own face, now white as wax, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a silent scream. Vincent hadn't died of a fever. Vincent had been poisoned in the storeroom by Balthazar Giddens. Clara's legs would no longer hold her. She let the mirror fall again, this time carelessly, and dragged herself to a corner of the room, hugged her knees, and began to tremble violently. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Her husband had been murdered, and she had seen it with her own eyes in that impossible mirror. But how? How could a mirror show the past? Was she mad? Had she finally gone insane, just like Genevieve? Or was this real? Clara pressed her hands to her temples, trying to organize the chaotic thoughts swirling in her head. If it was real, if Vincent was truly poisoned, then the debt had been forged. Then he had been killed on purpose. But why? What could a poor blacksmith have done to be murdered? The words Vincent had shouted on his deathbed came back with full force. They know. They're going to kill me. I saw too much. He knew. He knew he was going to die. He knew who would kill him. He had seen something, discovered something, and he had paid for it with his life. Laura's voice calling from the yard brought Clara back. "Mama, where are you?" Clara wiped her face on the back of her hand, tried to control her voice. "I'm here, my love. I'll be right out." She looked at the mirror lying on the floor. The silver frame gleamed in the dim light from the window. She had to hide it. She couldn't let the girls see it. She couldn't let anyone know what she had discovered. With swift movements, she picked up the mirror, wrapped it again in the black cloth, and tied it securely. She looked around for a hiding place. Under the bed frame? No, too obvious. Behind the chest? No, not there either. Finally, she decided to put it under the makeshift bed where the girls slept, deep in the back against the wall, covered by their bundles. No one would see it there without deliberately looking. Night fell, and with it came a new kind of fear. Clara cooked, fed the girls, and put them to bed. But she couldn't close her own eyes. She sat with her back against the wall, watching the door, the windows, waiting. Waiting for what? She didn't know exactly, but if Balthazar had killed Vincent, if there was a conspiracy, if she had discovered the truth, then she was in danger. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the house. Clara froze. The girls were fast asleep, exhausted as always. The footsteps stopped in front of the door. There was a long, tense silence. Clara held her breath. Then the footsteps started again, moving away, disappearing into the night. She ran to the window, peering through a crack between the boards. She saw a figure moving away down the road. It was a man, she was sure of that, but she couldn't see who. The figure stopped once, looked back as if sensing he was being watched, then continued on and vanished into the darkness. Clara backed away, leaned against the wall, and slid to the floor. And in that moment, with an icy certainty settling in her chest, she knew three things. First, the mirror had shown her the truth. Vincent had been murdered. Second, she had just discovered a secret that powerful men had killed to protect. Third, whatever that mirror was, there were people in town who didn't want anyone looking into it, and now they knew she was here, in the house, alone, vulnerable. The night seemed endless. Clara stayed awake until the first light of dawn painted the sky a pale grey. Only then, with the light returning, did she feel safe enough to doze off. But even in her sleep, she dreamed of Vincent falling, of Balthazar smiling, of mirrors that showed things too terrible to be seen, and of shadows in the darkness, drawing ever closer. A week had passed since Clara found the mirror. A week of sleepless nights, of ever-deepening dark circles under her eyes, of trembling hands that couldn't hold a needle steady. She had looked into the mirror 3 more times, always when the girls were in the yard, always with her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. And each time she looked, she saw something new, something worse. The second time, she had seen a different scene. An older man, a farmer by the look of his good clothes and leather boots, walking down a dirt road at dusk. 2 men emerged from the woods, their faces covered with bandanas. One of them had a knife. The scene was quick, brutal. The farmer fell, the men took his purse and dragged his body into the woods. When one of the attackers pulled down his bandana to catch his breath, Clara recognized the face. It was one of the thugs who worked for Colonel Josiah Farris, the richest and most powerful man in the region. The third time, she saw something that made her blood run cold. It was an elegant room, likely the Colonel's study. 3 men sat around a dark wooden table. Colonel Farris, impossible not to recognize with his burly frame and imposing grey moustache. Balthazar Giddens, the portly merchant. And Sheriff Bernard Costa, a thin man with small, cruel eyes. There were papers on the table, money being divided, hands being shaken. All 3 were smiling, smiling like men who had just closed a profitable deal. The fourth time, the worst of all, she saw documents being burned in a fireplace. Documents with official seals, with signatures. She saw Balthazar writing new documents in a different hand, forging signatures, changing dates. Forgery. She saw the sheriff stamping the false papers with the seal of his office, giving them the appearance of legitimacy. She saw the colonel taking the documents and locking them in a large iron safe. And she saw one last thing that made everything make a horrible kind of sense. She saw a woman's body being carried by two men in the dead of night. The woman had long dark hair, a simple dress, a string of beads around her neck. The men threw her into the Swiftwater River, where the current was strong. The body sank, was carried away, and disappeared into the dark water. One of the men carrying the body was the same thug who had killed the farmer. The other was older, with a scar on his cheek. Clara didn't know him, but she would later find out that this man had vanished from town shortly after Genevieve Estes's disappearance. He had vanished because he knew too much. Because men who know too much don't live very long, Clara began to understand everything. Genevieve hadn't gone mad. Genevieve had discovered the crimes. She had witnessed them, had documented them somehow in that impossible mirror, and when they found out she knew, they killed her, exactly as they had killed Vincent, exactly as they would kill anyone who threatened the empire built on blood and lies. The mirror wasn't cursed. The mirror was dangerous. Because it showed the truth, and the truth in that town was the most dangerous thing of all. Clara had kept the mirror in the same hiding spot under the girl's bed, but now she looked at it differently. It was no longer an object of terror. It was evidence, it was proof, it was justice waiting to be served. But what could she, a poor widow without a penny, without influence, without allies, do against men who controlled everything? The colonel owned half the land in the region. The sheriff was the law. Balthazar controlled the commerce and the credit. Together they were untouchable, and yet Clara couldn't just forget. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vincent falling, saw her husband dying from poison, while Balthazar watched and did nothing. She saw the injustice, the cruelty, the impunity. Her husband deserved justice. All those victims deserved it. But what could she do? Fate answered her question in a cruel way on a Monday morning, exactly 8 days after she found the mirror. Laura woke up with a fever. Clara noticed it at dawn when she touched her daughter's forehead and felt the burning skin. The girl was pale, trembling, complaining of a sore throat and body aches. Beatrice also started coughing during the day, a dry, persistent cough that racked her small body. Clara tried all the home remedies she knew. She made mullein tea for the cough, lemon and honey tea for the fever, and applied cold compresses to Laura's forehead. But by afternoon, the fever had worsened. Laura was mildly delirious, calling for her father, asking when they were going back to their real home. Beatrice threw up twice and grew even weaker. Miss Hattie appeared at the fence, as always, saw Clara's desperation, and came in without asking. She looked at the girls with a grave expression, her thin lips pressed together. "You need a doctor, child," she said in a serious voice. "This fever is no joke. Could be pneumonia, could be whooping cough, could be a lot of things. She needs a doctor." Clara felt tears well up. "I have no money for a doctor, Miss Hattie. I have nothing." The old woman grew thoughtful, then hesitated before speaking. "You could ask the colonel. He sometimes helps the poor when it suits him. He might give you the money." The suggestion felt like a punch to the gut. Go ask for help from the man who had ordered her husband's murder. From the killer, the monster. But then she looked at Laura, burning with fever, at Beatrice coughing up blood into a handkerchief, and she knew she had no choice. She would do anything to save her daughters, anything, even humiliate herself before the devil himself. She left the girls in Miss Hattie's care and walked to the Clear Springs estate, Colonel Josiah Farris's property. It was a 2-mile walk under a hot midday sun. Clara went barefoot because her boots had holes and she had no money to mend them. Her feet were bleeding by the time she arrived, the red dust clinging to the blood to form a brown paste. She didn't care. The estate was impressive. A large 2-story house, its walls a brilliant whitewash, a red clay tile roof, wide verandas with turned wood columns, and manicured gardens with colourful flowers. There was a fountain in the middle of the courtyard, water spouting from a stone angel, a refreshing and beautiful sound. Clara felt a mix of awe and hatred. All of this had been built with blood. She knocked on the side door, the one the servants used. An elderly housemaid answered, looking Clara up and down with ill-disguised contempt. "What do you want?" Clara kept her voice steady. "I need to speak with the Colonel. It's urgent." The housemaid laughed. "The Colonel doesn't see just anyone. Be on your way." She tried to close the door, but Clara held it. "Please," she insisted. "My daughters are sick. I need help. I won't leave until I speak with him." Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, or perhaps the housemaid had a shred of compassion left. She huffed irritably, went inside, and returned 5 minutes later. "He'll see you," she said, surprise in her voice. "But be quick. He's a busy man." Clara was led through wide hallways with waxed plank floors, walls adorned with paintings of rural landscapes, and dark, heavy furniture that screamed of wealth. She arrived at a room that must have been the study. Shelves full of books that had likely never been read, a massive mahogany desk, a leather chair with brass tacks, a Persian rug on the floor, and behind the desk, Colonel Josiah Farris. He was exactly as Clara had seen him in the mirror, but more imposing in person. A large man, he must have been over 6 feet tall, burly but not fat, with broad shoulders and hands as big as shovels. His grey moustache was neatly trimmed, his hair slicked back with pomade, his clothes impeccable. A starched white shirt, a dark silk vest, linen trousers, and gleaming black leather boots. On his fingers were 3 solid gold rings with precious stones. On the desk lay a cane with a silver lion's head handle. In his eyes was a coldness that made Clara want to run. The colonel looked at her as if she were an insect. "You're the blacksmith's widow," he stated, not asked. Clara nodded, unable to speak. He continued, his voice deep and measured like someone used to being obeyed. "I heard you moved into that house at the edge of town, the mad woman's house. Brave or foolish, I can't say. What do you want from me?" Clara swallowed hard and found her voice. "My daughters are sick, Colonel. They need a doctor. I don't have any money. I came to ask for your help." The colonel leaned back in his chair, folded his hands over his stomach, and studied her in a silence that seemed to last an eternity. "Why should I help a blacksmith's widow?" he finally asked in a casual, almost bored tone. "He was my employee, not my family, and from what I hear, he owed me money when he died." Something inside Clara broke at that moment. Maybe it was the desperation, maybe the accumulated anger, maybe just seeing her husband's murderer sitting there so calmly, so powerfully, so sure of his impunity. The words escaped before she could stop them. "Because you know my husband didn't die of a fever." The silence that followed was absolute. The colonel didn't move, but something in his eyes shifted. The coldness gave way to something far more dangerous. A focused, predatory attention. "What did you say?" he asked in a very low voice. Clara realized her mistake, but it was too late. She took a step back. "Nothing, Colonel. I'm sorry. It was just the grief talking. I didn't mean anything." But the colonel stood up, and on his feet he was even more intimidating. He walked around the desk, each step deliberate, and approached Clara until he was too close, invading her space. "You think your husband was murdered?" he asked, his soft voice more threatening than any shout. "Is that what you've been thinking? Is that what you've been saying around town?" "No!" Clara lied, her voice trembling. "No, Colonel, I just miss him. Sometimes you think things when you're grieving, but I know he died of a fever. The doctor said so." The Colonel continued to stare at her like a snake staring at a mouse. When he finally spoke, it was in a tone that allowed no argument. "I think it's best you forget these fantasies, widow. A poor, lonely woman talking nonsense can end up very badly. You could lose more than a husband. You could lose everything. Do you understand?" Clara understood perfectly. It was a direct threat. "Keep quiet, or your daughters will pay the price." She nodded, mute with terror. The Colonel went back behind his desk, opened a drawer, took out a few banknotes, and threw them on the desk. "That's $50, he said. "Pay the doctor. Take care of your daughters. And get out of that house. I'm having it torn down next week. I don't want anyone else living there." "Why?" Clara risked asking, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you want to tear down the house?" The Colonel smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "Because that place attracts undesirable people. It attracts trouble, and I don't like trouble. Now take the money and get off my property." Clara grabbed the notes with trembling hands and left before she could do or say anything else foolish. But as she walked back down the road, the initial fear gave way to another feeling: understanding. The Colonel was afraid. He had become agitated when she mentioned Vincent's death. He had become tense, alert, dangerous. That could only mean one thing. He knew. He was involved, and he was afraid someone would find out. What the mirror had shown was true. All of it was true. Clara used the money to call Dr. Abernathy, an elderly physician who served the town. He examined the girls, diagnosed early-stage pneumonia, and prescribed expensive syrups and tonics that Clara had to buy at Balthazar's mercantile. It was humiliating to walk into that store knowing its owner had killed Vincent. Balthazar served her with his oily little smile, charged her far too much, but she paid without complaint. With the treatment, the girls began to slowly improve. Their fevers broke, the coughing lessened. In 3 days, they were weak but out of danger. Clara thought the worst was over. She was wrong. On the 5th night after her visit to the Colonel, Clara had just put the girls to sleep when she heard a loud banging on the door. It wasn't the polite knock of a visitor. It was the knock of someone who intended to come in one way or another. Clara grabbed the lamp and went to the door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice trying to sound firm. "It's me, Balthazar," came the drunken, slurred reply. "Open this door, widow. I've got a message for you from the Colonel." Clara felt fear tighten its grip on her throat. "I'm not opening it," she said. "Come back in the morning." She heard laughter from outside. "You don't understand, woman. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Open this door, or I'll break it down." Clara looked back, saw the girls were now awake, frightened, huddled together. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and opened the door. Balthazar stumbled in, the strong smell of whiskey emanating from him. He was disheveled, his shirt untucked, his vest unbuttoned, his hair a mess. His bloodshot eyes stared at her with a mixture of anger and something worse. "So this is where you're living," he said, looking around with contempt. "In the mad woman's house. How fitting. The mad looking after the mad. What do you want?" Clara asked, keeping her distance. Balthazar took a few stumbling steps, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. "The Colonel sent a message," he said, "that you have 3 days to get out of here. 3 days. After that, we're coming to tear it all down, with you inside if we have to." He laughed at his own cruel joke. Clara felt anger rising inside her, replacing the fear. Anger at seeing her husband's murderer here, drunk and arrogant, in the home where she was trying to survive. "I'll leave when I can," she replied in a hard voice. "I have nowhere else to go." Balthazar stopped laughing. "Not my problem," he snarled. 3 days, that's what you've got. The Colonel doesn't like to be disobeyed." He began to walk around the house, touching things, knocking over her pot, kicking a bench. Pure, gratuitous malice. The girls were crying softly. Clara placed herself between them and Balthazar. "Stop it," she pleaded. "Please, just go." Balthazar stopped, looking at her with narrowed eyes. "Or what?" he challenged. "What are you going to do, widow?" That's when he saw it. The mirror. Clara had made a fatal mistake. That afternoon, she had taken the mirror from its hiding place to look at it one more time, trying to understand how it worked. She had left it leaning against the wall in the bedroom, partially covered by a cloth, but visible to anyone who looked. And Balthazar, stumbling into the bedroom, saw the silver frame gleaming in the lamplight. He froze. All the drunkenness seemed to evaporate instantly. His face went as white as chalk. Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice coming out strange, strangled. Clara realized her mistake. Too big, too terrible. "It's nothing," she tried. "Just an old mirror that was here." Balthazar wasn't listening. He walked toward the mirror as if hypnotized, picked it up, looked at the frame, turned it over, searching for something. When he saw the tiny letters engraved on the back, GE 1882, he let out a sound that was half groan, half scream. "It's hers," he whispered. "It's her mirror. We found it. We finally found it." He turned to Clara, his eyes wild. "Did you look in it?" he demanded. "Did you see anything?" Clara backed away, shaking her head desperately. "No, I saw nothing. It's just a mirror." But Balthazar didn't believe her. "You're lying," he said, advancing on her. "Your eyes tell me you're lying. You saw everything, just like the madwoman saw." He lunged. Clara tried to flee, but he grabbed her arm with brutal force. "I'm going to have to kill you," he said, almost with regret. "Just like we killed her. Just like we killed your husband. You know too much now." The girl screamed. Clara fought, trying to break free, but Balthazar was stronger. He threw her to the floor, climbed on top of her, his fat hands going for her neck. And then something changed. Balthazar was pulled backward with violent force, yanked off Clara, and fell to the side. A man had come through the door, a man Clara had never seen before, tall, dark-haired, with a stubbled jaw, wearing traveller's clothes. He had a scar on his face and grey eyes as cold as ice. He hauled Balthazar up. The fat man tried to fight back, but the stranger punched him once, a precise, calculated blow to the chin. Balthazar dropped like a sack of potatoes and lay still on the floor, unconscious. The stranger looked down at Clara, still on the floor, panting for breath, red marks already forming on her neck from Balthazar's fingers. "Are you all right?" he asked in a deep voice. Clara couldn't answer, just stared at him, uncomprehending. Who was he? Where had he come from? Why had he helped? The man offered her his hand, helped her to her feet. Then he looked at the terrified girls in the corner and spoke in a softer voice. "It's all right now. He's not going to hurt you." He glanced at the unconscious Balthazar. "But he'll wake up soon, and he'll bring others. You're not safe here." "Who are you?" Clara finally managed to ask. The man hesitated. Then he saw the mirror, dropped on the floor where Balthazar had left it. He walked over to it, picked it up, turned it in the lamplight, and touched the frame with fingers that trembled slightly. He ran his thumb over the engraved letters. GE. When he looked back at Clara, there were unshed tears in his eyes. "My name is Michael Estes," he said, his voice hoarse. "Genevieve was my sister." The world stood still. Clara looked at the man, at the mirror, back at the man. Genevieve's brother. The brother of the woman who had been murdered for discovering the truth. He was here, in front of her. How? Why? Michael seemed to understand her unspoken questions. "I got back from the war a month ago," he explained. "I was a soldier in the war between the states. When I returned, I looked for my sister. They told me she had gone mad and disappeared 7 years ago. I came here, started asking questions. No one wanted to talk. I found out where her house was. I saw you living here with your girls. I've been watching from a distance, trying to figure out what happened." "You've been watching me?" Clara asked, remembering the figure she had seen several times. Michael nodded without shame. "I had to be sure you weren't involved in what happened to my sister. Tonight, I saw that man come in here. He seemed aggressive. I decided to intervene." He glanced at the still unconscious Balthazar. "Good thing I did. This pig was going to kill you." If you're enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that the truth always comes to light, no matter how deep they try to bury it. Michael picked up the mirror again, examining it with care, almost reverence. "She did it," he murmured. "My sister did it." Clara didn't understand. Did what? Michael looked at her. Genevieve was special, brilliant. She studied with a French scientist who passed through these parts years ago. He taught her about photography, about how to fix images on glass plates using silver salts. She became obsessed with the idea. She wanted to perfect the process, to create something permanent. He pointed to the mirror. "This isn't an ordinary mirror. It's treated glass, prepared to capture and fix images permanently. It's like a visual diary, a photographic archive." Clara looked from the mirror to Michael, trying to process it. "So, it's not magic? It's not a curse?" Michael shook his head. "It's science, a science no one else knows, that my sister developed on her own. She wrote to me 8 years ago, telling me she had discovered terrible things in this town, crimes, corruption. She said she was going to document everything. It was the last letter I ever received from her." He looked around the house with a pained expression. "She died here, didn't she? She didn't go mad. She found out something she shouldn't have, and they killed her." Clara nodded, her voice low. "I saw it in the mirror, 2 men throwing a body in the river. Was it her?" Michael closed his eyes, took a deep breath. He opened them again, but now they were hard. "So, the mirror shows it. It shows what she documented." He looked at Clara with intensity. "What else did you see?" Clara told him everything. Vincent's murder, the farmer being killed on the road, the 3 men dividing the money, the documents being forged and burned. Michael listened in silence, but she could see the muscles in his jaw clenching, his hands tightening until his knuckles turned white. When she finished, he stood still for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice controlled but vibrating with contained rage. "Colonel Josiah Farris, Balthazar Giddens, Sheriff Bernard Costa, 3 men, an empire of crime. How many people have they killed? How many lives have they destroyed?" "I don't know," Clara answered, "but they killed my husband. They killed your sister, and they'll kill us too if they find out what we know." Michael glanced at Balthazar, who was beginning to groan, coming to. "They already know. Or they will soon, when he wakes up and tells the colonel you have the mirror. You and your daughters are in mortal danger." "I know," Clara whispered, "but what can I do? Where can I go?" Michael thought quickly. "For now, you can't stay here. When this pig wakes up, he'll bring back reinforcements. They'll burn this house down with you inside. We need to leave, now." "But where can we go?" Clara insisted. Michael was already gathering their bundles, placing the mirror carefully inside one of them. "I know a place, an old woman's house. Miss Hattie, she seems to be the only decent person in this cursed town. We'll ask her for shelter." They left through the back door, Michael carrying Beatrice, who was dazed with fear, Laura clinging to Clara's hand, and they walked quickly through the night. It took them 10 minutes to reach Miss Hattie's cottage. Michael knocked, explained the situation in rapid words when the old woman answered. Hattie didn't hesitate. "Get in," she said, pulling them all inside. "Quickly." She led them to a small root cellar beneath the house, where she kept potatoes and onions. "It's not comfortable," she said, "but no one will look for you here. Stay quiet. I'll keep an eye out." Clara hugged the old woman with a gratitude that couldn't be put into words. Hattie just patted her on the shoulder. "It'll be all right, child. The good Lord doesn't forsake those who suffer injustice." In the dark cellar, Clara sat with her daughters, while Michael stood near the steps keeping watch. The hours passed slowly. It must have been around 3 in the morning when they heard it, shouting, running, and then the unmistakable sound of a crackling fire, of wood popping, of a roof collapsing. "They're burning the house," Michael said, his voice neutral. Clara held her daughters tighter, feeling a tremor run through her body. They really were going to kill them. They were going to burn them alive. In the morning, Miss Hattie came down with bread and milk. She told them what she had seen. The little house had been burned to the ground. Balthazar had woken up, returned with 6 armed men, stormed the empty house, and finding no one, ordered them to burn it all. Now, a rumor was spreading that Clara, her daughters, and a stranger had died in the fire. The bodies hadn't been found because the fire was too intense. Nothing was left. "That's good," Michael said thoughtfully. "If they think we're dead, they'll let their guard down. We have an advantage now." But Clara didn't feel she had an advantage. She felt terrified, exhausted, defeated. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice almost a sob. "We're trapped. No home, no money, hunted by powerful men. How are we going to fight this?" Michael held the bundle with the mirror. "With the truth," he said. "This mirror is proof, physical proof of their crimes. We need to get it to honest authorities, to the state judge in Charleston. He's not under the colonel's control. He can deliver justice. But Charleston is a 3-day journey," Clara protested. "How will we get there? And the girls? I can't expose them to more danger." Michael's face was serious. "I know, it's risky. But what's the alternative? To stay in hiding forever? To wait until they find out where we are and finish the job?" Miss Hattie, who had been listening, intervened. "I have an idea. Reverend Anselm keeps the old church records. Records of baptisms, marriages, burials, but also records of properties that were blessed. There might be information there about the lands the colonel stole. If we can get those documents along with the mirror, we'll have a complete case." "It's dangerous," Michael said. "The Reverend could be involved too." Hattie shook her head. "Reverend Anselm isn't evil. He's weak. He's afraid of the colonel, like everyone else. But if we confront him with proof, if we offer him protection, he might help." It was decided then. That night, Michael and Clara would go to the church, get into the archives and take the documents. It was a risk, but it was a chance. Perhaps their only chance. The day passed slowly, suffocatingly in the small cellar. The girls dozed, emotionally exhausted. Clara and Michael spoke in low voices. He told her about the war, about the horrors he had seen, about how he had come back changed, unable to fit into a normal life. Genevieve was the only family he had. When he learned she had died, something inside him had broken. Now he had a purpose again. Vengeance, or better than vengeance, justice. Clara told him about Vincent, about a love that had grown slowly but truly over the years, about the pain of losing him, about the guilt of not having seen the danger. Michael listened without judgment. When she finished, he said something she didn't expect. "You're a brave woman, braver than most of the men I knew in the war, to survive what you've survived, to still fight, to still protect your daughters. That's true heroism." Clara felt tears she hadn't shed in days. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, a firm, comforting touch. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. You have that." When night finally fell, Michael and Clara prepared. Miss Hattie gave Clara dark clothes to wear and lent her a straw hat to hide her hair. Michael was already dressed in black. They looked like shadows. They left through the back door, walked through the alleyways, avoiding the main streets, and reached the main church. It was midnight. Everything was locked, silent. Michael tried the side door. Locked. He examined the lock, took a piece of wire from his pocket that Clara hadn't seen him produce, and worked for 2 minutes. The door opened with a soft click. They entered. The church interior was dark, except for the faint glow of the sanctuary lamp. It smelled of incense, withered flowers, and candle wax. Michael got his bearings and pointed to a door behind the altar. "Should be through there." They walked in silence, each step measured. They reached the door, and just as Michael was about to open it, it swung open from the inside, and there stood Reverend Anselm, holding a lamp in one hand and a pistol in the other. "I knew it," the Reverend said, his voice trembling. "I knew you hadn't died. I knew you would come here." Michael pushed Clara behind him, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Reverend, we don't want any trouble. We just want justice." The Reverend gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Justice? In this town, you're either a fool or naive." The hand holding the pistol was shaking visibly. Reverend Anselm was a man of about 60, thin, balding, his face deeply lined. His eyes, which had once been kind, now looked haunted. "I should shoot you," he said. "I should call the sheriff. I should do what they tell me to, as I've always done." "Then why don't you?" Michael asked calmly. "Why are you hesitating?" "Indeed." The Reverend lowered the pistol slightly, leaning against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him. "Because I'm tired," he whispered. "Tired of lying, of covering up, of pretending I don't see. Tired of being a coward." He looked at Clara with an agonized expression. "I knew your husband was murdered. I heard the Colonel and Balthazar talking in confession. It's no secret if they're boasting of their crimes, is it? But I did nothing. I said nothing. For that I am damned." Clara felt anger, but also pity. The Reverend was weak, corrupted by his omission, but he was suffering. "You can do something now," she said. "You can help us. You can choose the right side for the first time." The Reverend looked at her, then at Michael. "It will cost me my life," he said. "If I help you, they will kill me." Michael took a step forward. "Either you help us and have a chance at redemption, a chance to stop them, to save other lives, or you don't help, and you live the rest of your days knowing you're an accomplice to murderers. What legacy do you want to leave?" The Reverend stood still for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he lowered the pistol completely. "May God forgive me," he murmured. "Come in. I'll show you where the documents are." He led them to a small room in the back, filled with shelves of old books, yellowed papers, and dusty documents. He searched and found a worn leather folder. "Here," he said, opening it. "These are property records. When landowners died, the church registered them for inventory purposes. You'll find names in here of people the Colonel killed, lands he stole." Michael and Clara leafed through them. There were dozens of records, properties that had officially been sold to the Colonel, but whose original owners had died under suspicious circumstances shortly thereafter. The dates matched up. The pattern was clear. "Can we take these?" Michael asked. The Reverend hesitated, then nodded. "Take them, but leave quickly. If they find me here with you—" He didn't need to finish. That's when they heard it. The sound of horses outside, voices, the front door of the church being thrown open, the light of torches, and a voice that Clara recognized with horror. It was the Colonel. "Reverend Anselm!" The deep voice echoed through the church nave. "I know you're in here, and I know you're hiding those rats. Come out now with them, or I'll burn this church down just like I burned that house." The three of them looked at each other in panic. They were trapped. The Reverend's face went white. "He knows. How does he know?" Michael thought fast. "Is there a back exit?" The Reverend shook his head. "Only the front door." Michael swore under his breath. Then we'll have to fight. But Clara grabbed his arm. Wait. She looked around frantically and saw a high window at the back of the small room. There, can we get through there? Michael sized it up. It was narrow, high, but possible. Yes, but you first. I'll hold them off while you escape with the documents and the mirror. No, Clara refused. We go together or not at all. Michael was about to argue when Reverend Anselm did something unexpected. He took a set of keys from his pocket and handed them to Michael. There's a secret door behind that bookshelf, he said, pointing. It was used in the old days when priests had to flee persecution. It leads to a tunnel that comes out outside of town, near the river. Take these keys. The first opens the door. The second opens a gate at the end of the tunnel. Why are you doing this? Clara asked. The Reverend smiled, but it was a sad smile. Because it's the first right thing I've done in 20 years. Now go. I'll entertain them. You'll die, Michael said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. The Reverend nodded. I know, but perhaps it's the only way to atone for my sins. Tell the authorities that Reverend Anselm died trying to see justice done. It's a better legacy than I deserved. He gave them a gentle push. Go! Michael moved the bookshelf with surprising strength, revealing a narrow door. He opened it with the key. There was indeed a tunnel, dark and fetid, but it was a way out. He looked at the Reverend one last time. Thank you. The Reverend waved, already walking toward the church nave, preparing to confront the colonel. Michael and Clara scrambled down into the tunnel. Behind them, muffled by the distance, they heard raised voices, the Reverend shouting, a gunshot, and then silence. Clara felt tears, but she didn't stop. She kept running. The tunnel was long, damp, with a low ceiling that forced them to stoop. There were rats, puddles of foul water, a suffocating smell of mold. But it was freedom. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached an iron gate. Michael opened it with the second key. They emerged into the night, gasping for breath. They were on the bank of the Swiftwater River outside of town, with dense woods all around. Michael looked around, getting his bearings. This way, he said. We have to get back to Miss Hattie, get the girls, and flee this God-forsaken town while we're still alive. They moved quickly through the woods, arriving at the back of Hattie's cottage. Michael gave a low whistle, the prearranged signal. Hattie opened the back door and ushered them inside. The girls ran to Clara, hugging her and crying with relief. We have to leave town, Michael told Hattie. Tonight. The colonel knows everything. He killed the Reverend. He'll search every house until he finds us. Hattie didn't hesitate. I'm going with you. I've got an old horse in the pasture. It's not much, but it can carry the girls. You two will walk. We'll take the trail through the woods. Avoid the roads. No, Clara protested. Miss Hattie, you've done too much. If you stay with us, you'll die. The old woman gave a dry laugh. Child, I'm 72 years old. I've lived longer than most. And I'd rather die doing something right than live a few more years as a coward. Let's go before it's too late. They gathered what little they had. Michael wrapped the mirror and documents with extreme care, and Hattie prepared bundles of food and water. They were just leaving through the back door when they heard a noise at the front. Violent banging. The sheriff's voice. Hattie, open this door! We know you're hiding them! Go! Hattie whispered, pushing them out. I'll hold them off. Michael hesitated, but Clara pulled him. We have to go, for the girls. We have to go. They ran to the pasture. Michael got the horse, put Beatrice and Laura on its back, and began to lead the animal. Clara ran alongside. Behind them, they heard the door being broken down, shouts, Hattie yelling back, cursing them. A gunshot. Silence. Clara stumbled and Michael caught her. Keep going. We have to keep going. She didn't die for nothing. We can't waste her sacrifice. So they continued, through the dark woods, along the narrow trail, fleeing for their lives and for the truth they carried. Behind them, the town of Blackwood Creek smouldered with its secrets and lies. Ahead of them, only an uncertain darkness and the fragile hope that justice still existed somewhere. But they had the mirror, they had the documents, and they had each other. It had to be enough, because it was all they had. Dawn was breaking when they stopped to rest. They had walked the entire night through the woods, tripping over roots, getting scratched by branches, sinking into muddy puddles. The girls were exhausted, asleep on the horse that Michael led with infinite patience. Clara could barely take another step. Her feet were bleeding, her legs trembled, her vision blurred. But they couldn't stop yet. They weren't far enough away. They found a small cave hidden by dense vegetation, half covered by vines and ferns. Michael helped the girls down from the horse, carried them into the cave, and gently laid them on a bed of dry leaves he quickly gathered. Clara staggered in, collapsed into a sitting position, and leaned against the cold rock. Michael tied the horse to a nearby tree where there was some grass and returned to the cave. They sat in silence for a long time, just breathing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. "Miss Hattie died for us," Clara finally said, her voice broken. "The Reverend died for us. How many more people have to die before this is over?" Michael looked at her with a serious expression. "They didn't die for us. They died because they chose to do what was right, because they decided they would no longer live in silence while evil won. This is not our fault. It's the murderer's fault. But if we gave up, if we just ran away and forgot everything, they'd still be alive." Michael shook his head firmly. "And how many others would die? How many other families would be destroyed? The Colonel and his thugs won't stop. They'll keep killing, stealing, and destroying lives. The only way to stop them is to expose them, to bring them to justice." Miss Hattie knew that. The Reverend knew that. That's why they did what they did. Clara knew he was right, but the guilt still weighed heavily. She looked at her sleeping daughters, so small, so innocent, dragged into this nightmare. Laura's face was smudged with dirt and dried tears. Beatrice clutched a stick as if it were a doll. What kind of life was she giving them, fleeing like criminals when they were the victims? "We'll make it," Michael said, as if reading her thoughts. "We'll get to Charleston. We'll show the mirror and the documents to the state judge. And we will see those murderers pay for everything they've done." Clara wanted to believe him, but she was too tired to have hope. They slept for a few hours, waking to the high sun. Michael went out to hunt and returned with 2 armadillos he had managed to kill with well-aimed stones. He cleaned the animals, built a small, sheltered fire in the cave, and roasted the meat. They ate in silence, each piece of meat a blessing. The girls woke up, cried a little, and ate too. They didn't ask questions. Perhaps they already knew they didn't want to hear the answers. They rested for the rest of the day, waiting for night to fall to travel again. It was safer in the dark, less chance of being seen. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and purple, Michael prepared everything for their departure. But before they left, Clara asked to see the mirror. Michael unwrapped it carefully and handed it to her. Clara held the silver frame, felt its weight, and looked into the glass. She saw no images this time, only her own reflection, too thin, too marked by suffering. But she also saw something else. She saw determination. She saw a strength she didn't know she had. She saw a woman who was not going to give up, for Vincent, for Genevieve, for Hattie and Reverend Anselm, for all the victims, for her daughters, for justice. She rewrapped the mirror with reverence. "Let's go," she said, her voice firmer now. "Let's finish this." They traveled for 3 nights. During the days, they hid in the woods, in abandoned barns, once in a forgotten chapel by the side of the road. Michael hunted or stole eggs from chicken coops, fruit from distant orchards. They drank water from streams. The girls endured with a courage that broke Clara's heart. They didn't complain, they didn't cry, they just kept going. On the 3rd night, They reached a crossroads. A signpost showed the directions. One sign read, Charleston, 45 miles. They were close, so close. But it was there that fate turned cruelly against them. They were crossing the road when they heard horses, many horses. Michael pulled Clara and the girls behind a large tree and covered the horse's mouth to keep it from whinnying. They watched from their hiding place. A group of 8 mounted men passed by, all armed, torches illuminating the night. And at the front, mounted on a massive black horse, was Colonel Josiah Farris. They passed without seeing the hidden group, but Clara overheard part of the conversation. The colonel was speaking to the sheriff beside him. "They must be trying to reach Charleston," the colonel said. "We'll cover all the roads. When we find them, I'll kill them myself. No one does what they did and lives to tell the tale." The group passed, the sounds of the horses fading. Michael waited a prudent amount of time, then whispered, "They're patrolling the roads. They know we're headed to Charleston. They'll intercept us if we continue this way." Clara felt despair rising. "Then what do we do? We can't go back. We can't go forward. We're trapped," Michael thought, looking around, assessing their options. "There's another way," he said slowly. "Over the mountains. There's no road, just an old hunter's trail. It's much harder, much longer, but they won't expect us to take it." "How much harder?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. Michael hesitated. 3 more days. A steep climb, dangerous, but it's our only chance." "We have no choice then," Clara said. "We go over the mountains." The climb was hell. The trail was more of a suggestion than an actual path, disappearing between rocks and dense vegetation. The horse could barely manage the ascent with the girls. Michael had to pull it by force. Clara scrambled behind, her hands bleeding from gripping sharp rocks, her knees scraped, her body begging her to stop. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. On the second day in the mountains, it began to rain. Not a gentle rain. A violent storm with winds that tore branches from trees, lightning that ripped the sky, and water falling in sheets so dense you could barely see 2 feet in front of you. They sought shelter, finding a rock ledge that offered partial protection. They squeezed together under it, soaked, shivering with cold, huddled together to share warmth. The storm lasted all night. In the morning, when it cleared, they saw that the trail had washed out in several places. They would have to make huge detours or risk crossing unstable patches where landslides revealed terrifying drops. Michael went ahead, testing each step, while Clara held on to the girls. At one particularly bad spot, where the trail was too narrow for the horse, they had to leave the animal behind. Michael took the girls off, set the horse free, hoping it would find its way back down. They continued on foot. Laura and Beatrice held tightly to the adults' hands, each step measured, each breath a prayer. It was there, on that narrow, treacherous stretch, that the colonel found them. Clara didn't know how. Perhaps one of the colonel's men knew the trail. Perhaps they had damnable luck, but suddenly there were voices behind them. They looked back and saw the group climbing, still distant but visible. The colonel pointed and shouted, "There! It's them! Don't let them escape!" "Run!" Michael yelled. Clara grabbed the girls and started running along the slippery path. Michael followed, the bundle with the mirror and documents clutched to his chest. The men were in pursuit, gaining ground because they didn't have children to slow them down. The trail took a sharp turn, climbing even more steeply. They reached a narrow plateau with a cliff on one side and a rock wall on the other. It was a dead end. There was nowhere to go. Michael turned, facing the pursuers. As they arrived, he put Clara and the girls behind him. He held a piece of wood he'd found on the ground, his only weapon. "It's not much," he said with a bitter half-smile, "but it's what we have." The men arrived, forming a semicircle that blocked their only way out. Then the colonel pushed past them, coming to the front. He was caked in mud from the climb, his expensive clothes dirty and torn, but his imposing bearing was intact. In his eyes was a cold, mortal fury. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble," he said in a controlled voice that was more frightening than a shout. "A great deal. You've killed people, burned property, destroyed reputations. All for what, an old mirror and some worthless papers?" "They're not worthless," Clara said, finding courage from some deep place. "They are proof of your crimes, of the murders, of the stolen lands, of everything." The colonel laughed humorlessly. "Proof? To whom? Who is going to believe a poor widow and a vagrant outsider over me? I built this region. I am the law here. I am God here." "Not in Charleston," Michael said. "You don't control everything there. There's real justice there." The colonel spat on the ground. "You will never reach Charleston. You will die here, on this mountain, and your bodies will rot where no one will ever find them. And I will continue to be Colonel Josiah Farris, the most powerful man in the region." He gestured, and his men began to advance. "Wait!" Clara cried out. "What do you want? Money? You can have all the lands. Just let my daughters live, please." "They are innocent children." The colonel looked at the crying girls, seeming to consider it for a moment. Then he shook his head. "I can't risk it. You know too much. You've seen too much. I'm sorry, but you will have to die. All of you." The men advanced. Michael raised his ridiculous stick, ready to fight to the end. Clara hugged her daughters, closed her eyes, and began to pray. And then, like a miracle, they heard new voices. Strong, authoritative voices shouting, "Halt! In the name of the law, halt!" Everyone looked. Coming up the trail, appearing like avenging spirits, were soldiers, state troopers in blue uniforms carrying rifles, many of them, led by an officer on a white horse. The colonel turned pale. "Impossible," he whispered. The troopers arrived, surrounding the entire group. The officer dismounted and walked toward the colonel, his hand on his saber. "Colonel Josiah Farris," he asked in a voice that cut like a blade, "you are under arrest for the crimes of murder, forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy." "This is absurd," the colonel exploded. "Who gave you this authority? I know the governor. I know the Chief Justice. You will regret this." The officer was unmoved. "I have a warrant from the state judge in Charleston," he said, showing a sealed paper, "based on evidence presented by a Mrs. Hattie Ferreira. She arrived in Charleston 4 days ago and delivered a mirror with photographic images and church documents proving your crimes." Clara nearly collapsed. Hattie. Miss Hattie hadn't died. She had escaped. And she had taken... But wait. If Hattie had taken the mirror, what had they been carrying? Michael, apparently having the same revelation, opened the bundle he had protected with his life. Inside were rocks wrapped in cloth, weighted to simulate the mirror, and a note written in a shaky hand. "If you are reading this, I am either alive or dead, but the mirror is safe. I took it before you returned. Forgive the lie, but it was the only way to ensure it arrived safely. I had faith you would make the perfect bait, drawing their pursuit while I reached Charleston. Forgive a cunning old woman." "Hattie." Michael began to laugh, a real laugh, a sound of pure relief and admiration. "That clever old woman. She used us as a decoy. She knew the colonel would come after us while she took the safe road." Clara laughed too, tears streaming down her face. Miss Hattie was alive. She had made it. She had saved them all. The colonel tried one last gambit. He pulled a dagger hidden in his boot and lunged for Clara, trying to take her hostage. But he was desperate, slow. Michael intercepted him, disarming him with a swift move learned in the war. The colonel fell to the ground, rolling dangerously close to the cliff's edge. For a moment, it looked like he would fall, but the troopers caught him, pulled him back, and handcuffed him. Balthazar and the sheriff were also arrested, trying to flee on the main road. The entire operation had been coordinated. Hattie had told the state judge everything, and he had sent 3 groups of troopers to cover all possible routes. It was a perfect trap. And the criminals had walked right into it. If this story is touching your heart, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share it with those you love. The troopers escorted everyone back. The descent was long but safe. They arrived in Charleston on the 5th day. It was a large, beautiful city built in the mountains, with colonial houses, churches with golden steeples, and stone streets. Clara had never seen anything like it. The girls looked at everything with wide eyes, full of wonder and curiosity. They were taken directly to the courthouse. It was an imposing building, with rooms that had high ceilings, marble floors, and the state seal on the wall. Inside, in a smaller but still elegant chamber, were the state judge and Miss Hattie. The old woman was sitting in a cushioned chair, sipping tea from a porcelain cup as if she were a queen. When she saw Clara and the girls, her wrinkled face lit up. She stood with some difficulty and opened her arms. Clara ran and hugged her with enough force to break bones. They both cried, laughing and crying at the same time. "I thought you were dead," Clara said between sobs. "I heard a shot." Hattie patted her back. "The bullet grazed me. I played dead. When they went to look for you, I slipped out the back, grabbed the mirror and documents I had hidden while you were getting ready, mounted my neighbor's mule, and rode like I haven't ridden in 30 years. I arrived here half dead from exhaustion, but with the proof intact." The state judge, a serious man in his 50s with gold-rimmed glasses and an impeccable black robe, listened to all their stories. He examined the mirror with scientific fascination, consulting with experts who confirmed it was an advanced photographic technique, genuine and unadulterated. He examined the church documents, compared them with official records, and found enormous inconsistencies that proved the forgeries. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. It would be public, like all important trials. While they waited, Clara and the girls were housed in a modest but clean boarding house, paid for by the court. Michael stayed as well, in a separate room, but he visited every day. Miss Hattie was treated like a hero, given the best room and everyone's attention. The 2 weeks passed slowly. Clara regained some of her strength, and the girls began to be children again, playing in the small garden of the boarding house. Michael brought them candy and told them stories that made them laugh. Clara watched him with gratitude and something more, something that was growing, warm and strong, that she wasn't ready to name yet. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. People from all over the region, curiosity seekers, journalists, officials. Colonel Josiah Farris was brought in handcuffs, still trying to maintain his dignity, but failing miserably. Balthazar Giddens followed, fat and sweating, trembling visibly. Sheriff Bernard Costa tried to keep a straight face, but his eyes betrayed his terror. The trial lasted 2 full days. Witnesses were called. Clara told of Vincent's death, the discovery of the mirror, the chase. Michael told of Genevieve's disappearance, the conspiracy he uncovered. Miss Hattie confirmed everything, adding details about the climate of fear in the town, about how everyone knew but no one dared to speak. Experts presented their analysis of the mirror, explaining how the images had been fixed, confirming their authenticity. The church documents were presented, compared with official records, showing clear manipulation. Witnesses from Charleston, who had done business with the colonel, spoke of his intimidating tactics, his veiled threats. The defense attorneys tried to discredit the evidence, calling Clara a mad woman, Michael an opportunist, and Hattie senile. But the evidence was too solid, too consistent. There was no denying it. At the end of the 2nd day, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned in 2 hours. The verdict, guilty, all 3 of them. Guilty of multiple counts of murder, forgery, embezzlement, racketeering, and corruption of an official. The sentence came, harsh and final. Colonel Josiah Farris and Balthazar Giddens were sentenced to death by hanging. the maximum penalty for multiple premeditated murders. Sheriff Bernard Costa, for having partially cooperated during interrogation, received a sentence of life in prison with hard labor. The colonel heard the sentence with a face that turned to ash. He tried to shout protests, but his voice failed him. Balthazar collapsed, crying, begging for a mercy that would not come. The sheriff just bowed his head, accepting his fate. But the sentencing didn't end there. The judge ordered the confiscation of all illegally acquired properties. An investigation had identified 14 stolen farms, totaling 2,000 acres of land. These properties were to be returned to the legitimate heirs of the victims. Where heirs could not be located, the lands would be auctioned and the money distributed to public works in the region. One of the properties was a small 50-acre farm that had belonged to Vincent's father. It had been taken by the colonel 10 years prior through a forged document after Vincent's father died in a suspicious accident. It was now returned to its rightful heir, Clara May Thompson. Additionally, Clara would receive compensation of $5,000 for the murder of her husband, a considerable sum. Michael would receive $2,000 for the death of his sister Genevieve. Miss Hattie would receive $1,000 for her bravery and services to justice. When it was all announced, Clara couldn't process it. She had a farm, she had money, she had justice for Vincent, she had a future for her daughters. It was too much. It was impossible. But it was real. As she left the courthouse, a crowd applauded her. They called her brave, a hero, an example. Clara didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted, relieved, and free. For the first time since Vincent's death, she felt a genuine peace begin to grow where there had only been pain. The execution of the colonel and Balthazar was scheduled for the following week. Clara did not wish to attend. She had no stomach for watching death, even a deserved one. But on the day, she learned it had been done. Justice had been fully served. The monsters were dead. They couldn't hurt anyone else. In the following days, Clara had to make difficult decisions. She had a farm and money. She could live comfortably for the rest of her life if she wanted. But she thought of Miss Hattie, of Reverend Anselm, of all the colonel's victims. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of example she wanted to set for her daughters. She decided to keep the 50-acre farm. It was good land with a reasonable house that needed repairs, but was solid. It would be enough to raise the girls, to live with dignity, without luxury, but without want. The rest of the money, half of the compensation, she decided to donate. She used $2,000 to build a school in Blackwood Creek, in the town that had turned its back on her, but deserved a chance at a better future. The school would be built on the exact spot where the little house had burned down, turning a place of tragedy into a place of hope. It would be named the Genevieve Estes School, in honor of the brave woman who had documented the truth, knowing she would likely die for it. The rest of the money she divided among the families of the other identified victims of the colonel. It wasn't much for each, but it was an acknowledgement, a reparation, a material justice beyond the symbolic. When she announced her decisions, many thought she was crazy. To give up so much money? But Michael understood, Miss Hattie understood, and most importantly, Clara understood. She was doing the right thing, and that was worth more than any fortune. The mirror, that impossible object that had changed everything, was donated to the State Museum in Charleston. It was accompanied by a plaque explaining the technique developed by Genevieve Estes, a brilliant self-taught scientist, and how it had been used to unmask a criminal conspiracy. Students and scientists came from far and wide to examine it, to try to understand how it worked. Genevieve would have no museum or statue, but she would have something better, recognition of her genius and courage. Months passed. Clara returned to the region, but not to Blackwood Creek. She settled on the farm that was now hers, 25 miles from the town. She began to work the land with the help of hired hands whom she paid a fair wage. She planted coffee, corn and beans and raised chickens and pigs. The house was slowly renovated. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a home. Laura and Beatrice flourished. They gained weight, colour returned to their faces, and their laughter came easily. They began to study with a teacher Clara hired, who came 3 times a week from a nearby town. They played in the pasture, helped with the animals. They were children again. Michael did not leave. Clara had thought he would, after justice was done, after Genevieve was avenged. But he stayed. He built a carpentry workshop on the farm and began making furniture, gates and tools. He said he had nowhere to return to, that the war had taken from him the ability to live in a big city, that a simple life on the farm was what he needed. But Clara knew there was more. She saw it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She saw it in his kindness to the girls, in his patience teaching Laura to carve wood, in how he carried Beatrice on his shoulders, making her laugh. She saw it and felt something corresponding growing in her. It wasn't like it was with Vincent. That had been a love that grew slowly from friendship and companionship. This was different, forged in fire, tempered by blood, based on a deep mutual respect and shared survival. One evening, 6 months after it all, as they sat on the porch of the house, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Michael finally spoke. "Clara," he began hesitantly, a rare thing for him. "I have to ask you something." She looked at him, her heart speeding up. Do you think you could ever see me as more than a friend, more than an ally? Because I look at you, and I see the bravest woman I've ever known. I see someone I want to spend the rest of my life with. But only if you want to. Only if you feel the same." Clara was quiet for a moment that seemed an eternity. Then, slowly, she placed her hand over his. "I do," she said simply. "I have for a long time. I was just waiting for it to be right. I think now it is." Michael smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his scarred face. He squeezed her hand. "I won't replace Vincent," he said. "I would never try. But we can build something new, something ours, if you'll let me." Clara nodded, tears of happiness tracing paths down her face. "I'll let you." They were married 3 months later, in a simple ceremony on the farm. The guests were few but important. Miss Hattie, of course, now considered the girl's honorary grandmother. A few new neighbours from the region who had become friends, the state judge who had delivered justice. A new reverend from Blackwood Creek, a young, honest man who had replaced Reverend Anselm and was trying to rebuild the community's trust. Laura and Beatrice were the flower girls, beautiful in simple white dresses Clara had sewn. They cried with joy and hugged Michael, calling him father for the first time. Michael cried too, unashamed. A year passed, then 2. The farm prospered. The coffee harvest was good. The cattle multiplied. There was always food on the table and money for their needs. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. The school in Blackwood Creek was inaugurated with a great celebration. Clara was there, with Michael and the girls. The entire town attended, many coming to ask for forgiveness for having turned their backs when she needed them. Clara forgave them. It wasn't in her nature to hold a grudge. She understood that people had been afraid, that the colonel had ruled through terror. Now the terror was over. The town could begin anew. The school had 4 rooms, a small library with donated books, a competent teacher hired from the capital, and 43 enrolled students. Children who previously had no access to education were now learning to read, write, and do arithmetic. It was a future being built brick by brick, word by word. At the school's entrance, a bronze plaque bore an inscription, "The Genevieve Estes School." Below it, smaller text read, In memory of Genevieve Estes, a woman of courage and science who documented the truth at any cost, and of Miss Hattie Ferreira and Reverend Anselm Rodriguez, who risked their lives for justice. May this school be a beacon of knowledge, where once there was only the darkness of ignorance and fear. At the inauguration, Clara was invited to speak. She stepped up to a small, makeshift platform, looked at all those faces, some familiar, many new, and found the words that came from her heart. "This school is not about me," she began. "It's about all the people who suffered injustice and could not fight back. It's about the courage to get up when the world knocks you down. It's about the truth that cannot be buried forever, no matter how hard they try. It's about the future. About giving our children what we didn't have: knowledge, opportunity, hope. May every child who studies here know that they can change the world, that they can be brave, that they can make a difference." Applause erupted. Clara stepped down, hugged Michael, hugged her daughters, and hugged Miss Hattie, who was crying with pride. More time passed. 18 months after the trial, it was December of 1890. The farm was even more beautiful. The house had been painted white with blue shutters, a garden in front bloomed with roses and lilies, and a productive vegetable patch thrived out back. There was an organized chicken coop, a clean pig pen, and a corral with healthy cattle. It was a place that breathed life, work, and dignity. It was Christmas Eve. Clara had prepared a small feast, inviting Hattie and a few neighbors. The table was laden with simple but plentiful food: roasted chicken, rice, beans and bacon, collard greens, cornbread cake and apple butter. There was laughter, lively conversation, and children playing in the yard. Clara was on the porch, watching it all. When Michael came up beside her, he put an arm around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm thinking about how life changes. 2 years ago I was living in a house everyone cursed, with no hope, no future. Now I have all of this." She gestured to the farm, to the laughing girls, to the gathered friends. "Sometimes it doesn't feel real." "It's real," Michael said, kissing her forehead. "You made it real. Your courage, your refusal to give up, your determination to do what was right even when you were afraid. You built this." Clara shook her head. "It wasn't just me. It was Vincent who taught me the value of honest work. It was Genevieve who documented the truth. It was Miss Hattie who risked everything. It was Reverend Anselm who finally chose the right side. It was you who fought by my side when you didn't have to. It was all of us," Michael agreed. "It was, but you were the heart of it all. Never forget that." They stood there, holding each other in a comfortable silence, watching the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Laura ran out of the house, followed by Beatrice. "Mama, Papa, come see. We made Christmas drawings." The two went to look, carefully examining the children's drawings pinned to the wall. One of them caught Clara's eye. It was a drawing of a mirror, the frame drawn with unusual care for a 12-year-old. Around the mirror, Laura had drawn flowers and written in careful letters, "The truth shines." Clara felt her eyes sting with tears. She hugged Laura. "It's beautiful, my love." Laura beamed with pride. "The teacher told us the story of the mirror in school, how it helped bring justice. It's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I want to be brave like you when I grow up, Mama." "You already are," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You and your sister are the bravest children I know. You survived things that grown-ups couldn't. I'm so proud of you." That night, after everyone had gone home, after the girls were asleep, Clara and Michael stood on the porch looking at the stars. "It's strange to think," Clara said thoughtfully, "that it all started in that awful little house, the place nobody wanted, the place everyone cursed. If I hadn't gone there, if I hadn't found the mirror, none of this would have happened." "You would have been just another forgotten victim," Michael said. The colonel and his thugs would still be killing, stealing, and destroying lives. How many other Claras, how many other Genevieves would have died? You didn't just save yourself and your daughters. You saved future victims. You freed an entire community from tyranny. It wasn't just me, Clara repeated. Michael smiled. I know, but you were the spark. You were the one who didn't give up when it would have been easier to die or run away. You chose to fight. And because of that, the world is a better place. Clara thought of Vincent, of how proud he would be of her. She thought of Genevieve, whose sacrifice was not in vain. She thought of Miss Hattie and Reverend Anselm, whose lives had meant something in the end. She thought of all the anonymous victims who finally had justice even in death. She raised her eyes to the starry sky, clear and infinite. Thank you, she whispered to the stars, to God, to the universe, to whoever was listening. Thank you for giving me strength when I had none. Thank you for putting the right people in my path. Thank you for justice, for truth, for a second chance. The night wind blew softly, carrying the scent of fertile earth, of night-blooming flowers, of infinite possibilities. From somewhere in the distance, she heard the bell of the main church in Blackwood Creek tolling midnight. The sound was clear and pure, echoing through the mountains, carrying the promise of a new day, a new hope, a new beginning. Clara looked at Michael, at her home, at the life she had built from the ashes of tragedy. She looked and saw not just what she had, but what she had overcome. She saw a journey from pain to peace, from despair to hope, from victim to victor. Not through vengeance, not through anger, but by making the right choices even when they were the hardest. By not allowing evil to win without a fight. By turning darkness into light, the house that everyone had cursed had become a place where a future was being built. The mirror that showed horrors had become a symbol of truth and justice. The widow with nothing had become a woman with everything that mattered, not material wealth, though she had enough, not power, though she had found her strength, but peace, dignity, purpose, family, love. It was more than enough. It was everything. Clara took Michael's hand, squeezing it gently. Let's go to sleep, she said softly. There's a lot of work tomorrow, seeds to plant, fences to mend, a life to live. Michael nodded and kissed her hand. Let's. They went inside together and closed the door behind them. In the girls' room, Laura and Beatrice slept soundly, their faces peaceful, dreaming the dreams of children who know they are loved and safe. On the wall above their beds, the drawing of the mirror with flowers, and the words that summed it all up. The truth shines. It always does, even when they try to extinguish it, even when it seems impossible, even in the deepest darkness. The truth, like light, finds a way through the cracks, the spaces, the paths, and when it finally breaks through, it illuminates everything. Clara had learned this the hard way. She had paid a high price, but she had won. And in her victory, she had found not just justice, but redemption, not just peace, but purpose. She moved into the little house everyone cursed and found, in an old mirror, the truth that freed not only her, but an entire community. A truth about crimes that needed to be exposed, about justice that needed to be done, about the courage that exists in even the most unlikely of hearts. And that truth, once revealed, changed everything. It changed laws, it changed lives, it changed fates. It proved that no matter how powerful evil may be, no matter how deeply injustice is buried, there is always hope, there is always a chance. There are always those who will stand up and fight. Clara had been one of them, and her legacy will live forever in the school that educates children, in the lands returned to their rightful families, in the memory of Genevieve being honored, in the peace finally achieved. The night covered the farm with a blanket of stars. In the surrounding mountains, nocturnal animals began their songs. In the distant town, families slept in peace for the first time in decades, without fear of the powerful men who were no more. And on the small farm of Clara May Thompson, now Clara Estes, the lamplight was finally extinguished. But it was not darkness. It was a well-deserved rest. It was a hard-won peace. It was a life lived with dignity and courage. It was finally home.